as we begin our series of discussion today, we will see how we are having several different, gifted minds, experts on the field in various faculties where they will be coming and sharing, and giving and really to give us some insights, some solutions, some even strategies where we can no longer, feel fearful, where we can, that level of paranoia, mistrust, not just about people around us, but even the system. Some question whether our government is working for us, whether they are not working for us. So many questions. A topic such as this is quite far-reaching. There's no single fixture to the whole issue, but we want to begin the discussion, and we are asking the question today: where do we begin as we explore creating a safer place for our boys and girls? So, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our panel today. Is none other than Natalie O'Brady McDowell. She's a clinical therapist, someone who I've worked on several projects with, and she's here today. And as well as we have Mr. Adrian Alexander. He is the director of CURB, as well as a consultant and a facilitator, and indeed he wears several hats. So I want to give them the opportunity just to greet Trinidad and Tobago and those who are listening on our various platforms, both Facebook as well as on YouTube. So Natalie and but Natalie, you can say hi to our listening audience.
Hi, good afternoon, Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you for tuning in. And we are hoping that we can really help to come up with some good solutions. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Natalie. And we look forward to hearing from you. And let's welcome Adrian Alexander.
Hi, Kimline. Good afternoon, each and everyone. And those of you who are listening from around the world, it may be nighttime or morning where you are. Greetings to you from Trinidad and Tobago.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrian. And as we sort of explore this topic, I want to also, as you are seeing me as the founder and managing director, I want to, give kudos as well to the board of directors at Repair of Hearts Foundation, a very committed, hardworking, and dedicated team that we are, and indeed we are working, really about our mantra is one touch making, which makes a difference. And we are choosing to make a difference with a series of discussion. We normally would have had prior to COVID and having these face-to-face emotional and mental support sessions, but we're utilizing the technology, and we are praying that that indeed will have even a greater reach where more persons can be impacted. So let's begin the discussion. Yesterday, I would have spoken to one of my uncles actually, and I was talking to him about this. When you hear about creating a safer place for boys and girls in this Trinidad and Tobago, what comes to mind? And I asked him that yesterday. I asked several of our target group through Repair of Hearts Foundation. I was asking the men, different places were coming for reading up a lot of stuff. And a lot of persons were saying, in order for us to begin anywhere, we have to go back to basics, which is the home. And at this time, I wanted, allow Natalie O'Brady to hit the, as we bowling, we batting today. And we want you to, to take the first the first ball, sorry. As a clinical therapist, I want you to, give your input. Do you agree with that statement that if we're talking about creating a safe place for our boys and girls, is it in fact that you are saying we need to begin with the home? Because many are saying otherwise, where we need legislation changes and so forth. But can you, what's your response to that question?
All right. So I want to start by saying thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my perspective on the issue. And when we are talking about creating a safer future or place, I want us to understand that from my perspective at this time, that safer future or place, we're talking about a space where there is a reduction in or no violence towards women and children. All right. So it's a place free of violence towards women and children. because it's a very broad discussion. So if we are talking about violence against women, we need to understand that there is no quick fix, that this is something that has been ongoing for many years. And we have tried different avenues. We have tried, and we are continuing to try with legislation. There has been an amendment to the Domestic Violence Act, and different pieces of legislation towards protecting the rights, a woman's right to safety and security within the country. There has been a lot of um, new projects and programming around providing services to women who are victims, children who are victims, towards men who are also victims. So there's a lot of service programming around um, victim advocacy, victim protection, victim rights protection, healing of victims. Um, but one of the areas that we have constantly neglected is around prevention. And when we're talking prevention, we're talking about um, targeting perpetrator vulnerability towards perpetrating. What causes an individual to come to a place of engaging in this kind of behavior? And again, there's no quick fix. I need us to understand that, Trinidad and Tobago. I have been working as a therapist in this field for approximately 20 years. And yes, Adrian, that's how long we know each other, you know? And we have been working behind the scenes continuously. And it's going to take us we're going to continue to work. And I would say within that time that there has been changes, that lives have been touched. And I think Kim Lying said it a while ago in terms of the part of the mantra or the vision of repair of hearts is one life at a time. It's one family at a time. It's one community at a time. And that for me is the nexus of the change of creating this safer future or safer place. And I actually have a working theory of change for me, and we could talk about it as we go along. I believe that the key to this change actually lies in developing healthy relationships. It's all in the relationship. It's relationship with self, it's relationship with others, and that's where the family relationship is coming in there. It's relationship with God. So if we take apart those three areas of relationship, God, others, and self, and we start working in that context, you would realize that that is a long-term sustainable strategy that says that both you and I can actually do something that influences a life, and that life will influence another life, and that life will, and so it will go, and there can be a reduction. Um, yeah, and I will stop there for now. Not hearing you, Kim.
Yes, thanks so much, Nati, for sharing that. And what you would have, again, reminded our audience, there's no quick fix to, us, bringing and seeing that sort of safer future for our boys and girls is a continuous process, because it's over years of lawlessness in terms of people choosing to do their own thing. So it would now require a intentional effort. We have to be quite all of us engaging actively with regards to helping to see that sort of safer place for our boys and girls. And as you made mention of, we all want to see no violence, or reduction, as you use the word, with regards to violence within our nation, not just against girls and our women, because we are females, but also to our male audience as well, our men and our boys. And there's so much I want to ask you more, Natty, but let's bring the good day gentleman within the conversation. Adrian Alexander, that same question to you. Where you believe we need to begin this discussion? Yeah, there's so much being said, but in your expertise, in your field, and I heard Natalie made mention, you have 20 something years of experience of really working with boys in particular, based on my knowledge. Can you share, your input as well as we discuss this matter?
No problem, Kimlin, and thanks so much for the opportunity to just discuss these very, very important issues. I think for me, I often have a saying, and Natalie would remember this: everything is connected. I say that all the time because it's so very true. And too often we think in silos and we operate in silos. And that is where some of our ineffectiveness will come in, simply because an individual is not simply their physical being, they're not simply their mental being. Everything is connected. We are spirit, soul, and body. And what happens in one area of our lives will influence what takes place in the other areas. And I think if we're thinking along the lines of identifying where do we begin, that's where we have to begin. We have to understand that whatever it is that we are going to do, it stems from somewhere. It stems from things that are taking place in the person's spirit, in their soul, and in their body. And it's important to reinforce that simply because research abounds that shows that one's concept of life, whether it is you have a view of God, a higher power, whatever it is you call it, will influence how you behave in private or in public if you have a correct understanding. It also emphasizes that how someone thinks and your emotional state will influence how you behave. But it also really goes to show that your physical state, what you consume, often has an influence on how you feel and how you behave. So we can't get into addressing things in a slanted type of form. And for me, I start with an analogy. And that analogy is about a diagnosis. And I know there are so many television shows out now. Back in the day, long before you were born, Kimline, there was Marcus Welby, MD, on television. And a lot of us may remember House, you know, and now you have Chicago Med and so many others, but all of them have a similar thread. Before you begin to treat with someone, you must first diagnose what is taking place. And you can use different strategies for diagnosis. You can have your observations and ask the person to report to you what it is they're feeling, the different pains and so on that are taking place in various parts of the body. You know, you're looking at symptoms, and then you need to get down into testing, doing blood tests and so on to get more detailed information. And thereafter, you can begin to treat. Too often, a lot of the strategies that we're talking about may have been initiated on the basis of observation and not enough research. All right. And therefore, you may find that there are the emotional types of interventions that people would launch into. But zeal without knowledge tends to have its own shortfalls. And that's why we advocate that we understand what it is taking place, identify the root causes of what is taking place, and then begin to address it. So, going back to the medical analogy, you would need to treat with symptoms because some symptoms arise from root causes and they themselves become root causes of other things. But you always have to bear in mind that we have to address root causes. And it's quite unfortunate that sometimes the agencies or organizations that are engaging in the interventions, they are put on a tether in the sense that because they may be funded or because they may be state, they're operating on a very short window to produce results. And I say results in quotation marks. So you have to put in a report to your funders, and it's a 1 or 2 year project. And therefore, you're going to be putting something which is like a band aid on a tumor in order to put out that report and show that you're doing something to get more money. The same thing with state interventions. There's a 4 or 5 year cycle in many countries. And for that reason, you want to be able to say something at the end of that period of time to get the electorate to vote for you again. And these are not short-term fixes. I can't overemphasize that. These are not short-term fixes. And nor are these gender issues. And I say that and people sometimes get upset. But if we have that lens, then immediately we put ourselves in a silo and we've missed the bigger picture. These are not gender issues. These are human issues. These are human issues. And I would encourage people to look at the definition of gender-based violence and to understand that the behavior mentioned there is toxic behavior, regardless of the sex of the individual perpetrating it and the sex of the individual against whom it is perpetrated. It is toxic behavior. And therefore, we need to begin to educate not just our young people, but we have to start with our mature people against engaging in that behavior. It is not okay behavior just because it's engaged in by a female. It is not okay behavior just because the person on the receiving end is male. It is toxic behavior, period. So we have an international convention with a definition which specifies behavior, but because it slants it in a gendered lens, we have taken that and we have run with that. We've all jumped on this bandwagon and we've not taken the time to use our brain and think about this objectively. It is the behavior which must be addressed. And the reality is that boys and girls are exposed to this behavior. They are victimized by the behavior, and they both perpetrate the behavior. They're both learning it from, as you mentioned, the home environment, but also the community environment. And that is where I would begin, understanding what we are truly dealing with, having a proper diagnosis so that we can develop a proper treatment plan. I'll pause there.
Wow. Wow, you have said a lot there, Mr. Alexander. Um, and again, what you're reiterating, just as what Nati would have said, and I would have begun as well as in stating that there is no quick fix, and you would have used the terminology where you said there's no short-term fixes with regards to what we are seeing playing out in our nation of Trinidad and Tobago. You made mention of root causes, to the level of violence that we are seeing taking place in our nation. You also made mention with regards to, his toxic behavior, not just among our boys or men, but also with among our girls and women, because we are seeing even on quite often, whether it's YouTube or the television, where we are seeing our girls fighting and degrading themselves just as our young men and even the older men are doing it as well. Can you speak to that with regards to root causes? Because many people are talking and we're making a lot of noise, but we want to be solution oriented. And as you rightfully said, we see the branches, we see in terms of the fruits of the matter now, which is being played out with reference to deviant behavior as well as the violence perpetrated and both and against both genders, rightfully so. But what based on your experience, what can you say is the root causes? Can you talk to that and highlight those root causes for us?
Are you starting with me or Natalie?
To you, Adrian, and then we'll get to Natalie from
Sure.
the clinical side.
All right. Again, we have to go back to the family, right? But many of our families, unfortunately, have not been prepared to be families. Many of our families are unaware of what a healthy family relationship looks like. They have either been raised in an environment which has been harmful, or they may be dealing with their own personal challenges such that they are unable to demonstrate the love and the nurturing that the children in the home need. They themselves need that love and nurturing. And I think those are some of the core areas. But I would also go even broader, because when we think about health, we're not just thinking about physical health, we're also thinking about mental health. And there are so many families where being able to put something on the table for the family to eat is a challenge. Being able to read is a challenge. And when you begin to dissect sometimes the individuals who are committing acts of violence, whether it is violence against women, violence against other persons who are male. When you begin to hear their stories, their origin, a picture is painted. I'll give you an example. One of the defining moments of my life while I was at UE was hearing of a particularly atrocious, heinous act that took place in Trinidad and Tobago. That was where a woman and her baby were killed. Her husband was stabbed and left for dead. And I knew the relatives of the young lady who died. And my mind immediately went into rage that someone would hurt her as well as her baby. Years later, the irony of it all, I ended up meeting both persons who were alleged to have committed the act, and who were convicted of having committed the act. And I will tell you, hearing from one of them and hearing about the life that one of them had, I sincerely could not say whether, had that been me, had that been my life, that I would not have ended up in a similar state. And that disturbed me greatly, that I could not say that with certainty. Because this was a young man who was violently abused for years, for years. And too often, we label people based on their external behavior. And we have not adopted the practice of digging deep, not just scratching the surface, but digging deep to find out what has shaped this person. Hey, what wrong with you, boy? What wrong with you, girl? But no, that's not the right question. What happened to you? Because something happened to form you into someone who has little regard for someone else's property or someone else's life. Someone who perhaps doesn't even have a regard for your own life or your own body. Something has happened. And we need to begin to find out what that is so that we can help somebody. Because my trauma response may be criminalized rather than being a beacon to bring help and support to me. And that is an area in which we are feeling. So let's go back to the individuals. If we're looking at causal factors and what has happened to individuals. Because as Natalie will tell you, our brains function in a particular way. And when in the development of a child, things happen, it disrupts the natural development of our brains. It disrupts our emotional development as well. And that can lead to so many unfortunate consequences. So I'll hand over to Natalie.
Thank you, Adrian. And Adrian, you have hit the nail on the head. In truth and in fact, there are different lenses through which we can look at this crisis or this issue. And each lens bringing its own value and its ability to add towards our positively towards strategies of reduction. Um, so when we think about causality, I just like how he merged it very nicely, because I'm thinking one of the things, strategies I mentioned earlier, where the gap has been, is a lot of, in terms of prevention, in terms of looking at perpetrators and offender behaviors. Um, and when we talk about the perpetrator, I mean the name, like, I don't want to work with perpetrators. We are talking about individuals who may have had what we call adverse childhood experiences that has been proven to negatively impact their decision making, negatively impact their ability to cope, negatively impact their philosophy of life and society, and therefore they engage with life from that place. So if my childhood is one that is characterized by a lot of conflict and chaos in society. And all of us, we would look back to the way our childhood shaped. So for some of us, when we went through a lot of conflict as adults, we are now very organized and very structured because we learned as children to be able to survive, that we must create structure to be okay. So we are able to thrive in chaos. For some other people, the chaos overwhelms us, the conflict overwhelms us, the instability overwhelms us. And therefore, our coping might be to escape, to run away. And for other people, it might be to lash out. I feel pain, somebody else will feel my pain. So we look at that home environment again, which is where we started, Kimline, because the home is supposed to be the place that an individual escapes to if the environment outside of the home, the community is toxic, or unhealthy, or dangerous. All right. But if that space is unstable, riddled with conflict, um, where the parent is not able to be a parent because they themselves are wrestling with their history, and therefore they cannot be emotionally available. They have not had the learning as to how to be an effective parent, or they are unconsciously bringing the parenting styles of in terms of what they experience, and now impacting, or it's affecting the way they are parenting. So in other words, this is how my mother raised me or my father raised me, and unconsciously I'm doing the same thing to my child. So then my child is going to start to do the same. Those mistakes, those choices that we made, our children. Research has found that in terms of adoption studies and twin studies, that if we have children who are born to criminal parents, and maybe Adrian will tell us a little more, who are born to criminal parents, even if you take that child and you place them in a non-criminal environment, there is still that some of those children still engage in those criminal behaviors. So we start talking genetics there. Of course, if you have a child who are born to criminal parents and raised in that environment, of course, the behavior is going to be natural, criminal. But they are looking at and realizing that there might be some genetics that is influencing behavior, because, especially if both parents are engaging in criminal behavior. So we start talking biology, we start talking neuroscience, we start talking psychology, we start talking environment, we start talking poverty. So can we realize how complex? We start talking about drug abuse within the home. So we are saying here, what we need to put on different lens. We do need to put on the gender lens a little bit. We need to put on different lens to understand this very very complex issue, because each lens has value in that, because we take a very developmental psychological approach, then we understand here, what if this child is raised in a domestic violence or high conflict home, there's a chance that this child will engage in aggressive behaviors, or this child might put themselves as an adult into environments where they become victims. So it helps us in our strategizing. But I also agree with Adrian in that there is that need for more um, concrete research to guide our strategies so that we can be more effective. And yes, Kip.
Uh, very informative, even when that research that you made mention of there. But so I'm hearing a bit of, in terms of parenting, has a lot to do with reference to creating that safe space. Speak a little more pertaining to the role of the parent, with regards to working with the children.
Okay, so if we are to take an ecological theoretical approach, you throw in a little foundation in here, all right, and we are saying that each each individual is born into the context of a family, and you have these, and there's a reason for that. And even if we were to take a biblical approach, I always remind people that the Christ child, when he came, he didn't come into a single parent home. He was placed in the context where he had a mother and a father, and there was a specific reason for it, because this vulnerable human being needs to be protected from the elements. They can't feed themselves, they can't clothe themselves, they're completely dependent. And of course, evolution will tell you and science will tell you, you know, that if you put a very dependent, vulnerable animal, that the other animals will take advantage of it. You see it in the forest all the time. So that's why we have parents around, that they're meant to be that firewall, that protection, as that child learns and grows and engages and steps outside of the fence to go into the school and meets now other adults who are supposed to be protecting the child, engaging with other children and learning healthy interactions. But at the end of the day, goes back to the home, because that is that anchor, that safe place, that place of protection. But when our parenting is sabotaged by our history, by our experiences, then our ability to protect that child, that our ability to teach that child, that our ability to support that child is also sabotaged. So if my child is in a home where they see me whenever I get angry or become frustrated, I fly off the handle, I start pelting, breaking. When the child goes into the school environment, what do you think the child will do? Because they learn that this is the way it is done. They experience frustration. They're trying to write something. You're teaching the child to write a L and they can't get it and they feel the frustration. You see the pencil break. You know, if they pelt the pencil, they hit somebody else. And now the teacher now has to teach them other ways to cope. This is not appropriate. All right. So when we start thinking, and I know I keep going back and forth in terms of solutions. So when we start thinking, think about ways in your environment, how you can just think about that. That parent needs help. So it's not just the teacher, the parent needs help in terms of understanding how they navigate challenges. So maybe might be a relative, it might be a member in the church. Maybe there's room for a support group for parents raising children of a particular age so that they can get that skill, so that they can be healthier. And then the child, as the child engages and grows older, can learn positive ways of dealing with frustration, which is inevitable, disappointment, which is inevitable, and just life challenges, which are also inevitable.
Indeed is inevitable, and we will always have various challenges that will face all of us, from the child perspective as well as from the adult, and even from my working with community, doing community outreach and working with families. Quite often, I will ask myself, based on, again, you always use yourself based on what you would have experienced. Your parents give you a stare, one look, and well, here, what, shut your mouth, or move out of the way. But now it's quite baffling for me to see that you can't tell the difference. With regards to, the mother, the father is speaking, and the children are right in within discussion, and sometimes they fill in what the parents left off. And so there's a great breakdown within, the whole, value system. And I could even recall a very very current situation where I was registering a child for a program, and the child and the mother, I asked, filling out the form, I asked the mother the information for the father. And I mean, at that point, I was like, wow, really stunned, because in front of the child, the mother said, the father dead, and the child jumped. One time I said, Daddy died when he died. And the child was so traumatic by that. But so I had to, very skillfully, maneuver that situation. And then, speaking to the mother privately, she recalled to me that, well, the father, he's a bum, he really did, in her eyes, but he was really physically, not present. But she said he died, and it was so traumatic for the child, and then the thing about it, just by the parent doing that in front of the child, what she was basically doing, in fact, was lying as well. So what sort of values that she was indeed, demonstrating to that child at that point? And we might just, I'm talking about that situation. You would have made mention of others, but those it stemmed from those simple acts with regards to, what are we molding and shaping our children to become? Because what is the diet within the home? What is it diet? What are our children seeing us doing is indeed what they will, duplicate And I often say is that, what we do in moderation as adults, our children will do in excess. So so it's quite, or is quite incumbent on all of us, that there are always persons who are looking at us and how we behave and how we respond. So you might be a parent on this platform, and you might be listening to Natalie or Adrian at this time, and you're hearing so much. And you would say, well, I fall within the category where I didn't have good examples before me. My father was not around. I don't know my father. My mother, well, was just a hustler. Let's put it in that word, a very hustling to make fun, the in terms of providing for the home. And so there wasn't much time, much intimacy in terms of where she was able to impart that sort of proper value system. I want to ask Adrian to engage in that discussion, because I know, based on what you do, being a director there at Curb, can you share some insight to that in terms of children, both boys and girls, growing up in such environment? Because all of that is, again, what the foundation within the home, whether we are able to really build a safer place for boys and girls, or we just talking and we just playing games and we're not being intentional. So can you speak to that, Adrian, for us?
Sure, Kimline, and you use the right word there, being intentional. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that sometimes different silos engage in attempting to do something, and it's within their particular sphere. There is no concrete networking with others across the board so that we can intentionally deal with this situation as a whole. And that's quite unfortunate, but it speaks to other issues which we won't get into in this program. I think essentially it's important for us to appreciate that this is fixable. But as I said earlier, it's not a short-term fix. And too often we try to focus on that which is wrong and how to fix it. And I'd like to put another dynamic on the table. Let's look at individuals who are not displaying the problem behaviors that we mentioned earlier. Let's look at families which are not operating in gross dysfunction that we mentioned earlier. In the same way, you would have currency, and you would want to know its features so that you can distinguish it from that which is counterfeit. Let us examine that which is optimally functioning in terms of individuals and family, and learn from that so that we can share what they know, their experiences, with those who may not have had the benefit of that knowledge, that training, those inputs, and those experiences. A lot of persons have normalized their lives. And we hear it say, I normal, that normal. What's wrong with that? Simply because that is what they have seen, is what they have heard, and it's what they know, and not just in the home. Natalie made reference to adverse childhood experiences, and there's that landmark ACEs study from 1998. But over the years, we've seen how ACEs have been looking at not only childhood experiences in the home, but what happens in one's community. So if in my community, these things are also the norm, then as far as I am concerned, this behavior I'm exhibiting, identical to the behavior of my parents and my neighbor and other persons in my geographical community, it is normal. And those who operate outside of this pattern of behavior, they're the ones who are abnormal. So we need to be able to identify what truly is optimal in terms of individual behavior, success, aspirations, hopes, interactions, relationships, family, community, society. Let's look at that and begin to extract the foundations which have made those successful and strong, and begin to teach it to those who may have lacked it. Because they may have learned other things which are also quite beneficial and quite helpful, which can be targeted for pro-social purposes. So, as somebody said, if it is you're involved in a certain activity such as selling drugs, you know how to sell, you know how to market, So there are principles that you may be learning, even though in a very toxic environment, which can be utilized for non-toxic purposes. But if we only highlight, well, this is the problem here, and let's try and fix this one, and what we are doing is we're missing out on identifying that which is optimal first and begin to share it with others. And I think for that, you need hope to be instilled. So, for example, some years ago, we were doing programs at the Youth Training Center, as it was then called. And we realized that the first thing that needed to be addressed was the lack of hope in these young men. They had not seen persons in their community live beyond 24, 25 years of age. Therefore, they had no hope of that. And if you have no hope of living beyond 24, 25, you will definitely live fast because you expect to die young.
Mm.
There's no future planning that goes into your life. Therefore, you do anything with your body. You take whatever risk because you have no hope of looking on to 40s and 50s. There's nothing there. And even from a religious standpoint, we want to encourage people to have faith, but you cannot have faith if you don't have hope. Faith is the substance of that for which you hope. So we must instill hope. And that was one of the things that I know God utilized to bring success. And bringing hope means I am bringing somebody who looks like you, who may have been where you were, where you are now, but they're no longer there. And they can share with you the process map to get from where you are to where they are, and letting you know it is not impossible and that someone will be there to hold your hand to take you down this journey. And when hope is instilled, I can begin to plan. I can begin to make choices as to the company I keep. I can begin to make decisions as to whether I'm going to engage in criminal activities or lawful activities. I'm no longer tied to a one-day window of the world. I can look beyond and see 10, 15, 30, 50 years down the road because I have hope. Because I have hope. And too often the language that is being used in addressing the issues that we're discussing is language which perpetuates hopelessness and not language which is instilling hope. And sometimes we're telling people things, but we're not sticking around to walk with them through the process to get from where they are to where we're telling them they should be. So if you set me up like that and you drop me like a hot potato when you no longer have the funding to continue, or when it's no longer a popular buzzword for you or your organization, you have crushed the hope that you built up in me. And my response then may be far worse than my behavior prior to your instilling hope. Thank you.
We can see, ladies and gentlemen, is indeed this topic is quite comprehensive, and there's no quick fix. And as we look at as we look at our society, or any society, a matter of fact, it is taking one step at a time and really being able to put the pieces together, and being able to fill, even as you say, some gaps, certain foundational walls that ought to be, that was established. I mean, we even as we would go back to our foundation, and where the word of God would have said has broken down, and now we can see the ripple effect of it. And Adrian, you made mention of it, and I mean, I know Natalie would have also made mention of it, but I want us, because the persons are listening, and and I know in your field, you probably, you would use the terminology and you know what you mean, but it mean unless you know when you speak about the terminology, advanced childhood experiences, the ACEs. Either one of you can, define what ACEs is all about, and even give some examples within your field where you would have seen it being played out.
Natalie?
I like that, Adrian.
Oh,
So
Scott.
adverse childhood experiences is just what it says, ACEs. Adverse experiences that the child encounter. In other words, experiences that in normal development and they should not have to deal with. And that includes things as simple as divorce and separation of parents, any form of abuse, child abuse, witnessing domestic violence, death of a parent. Sometimes, and this is where Adrian mentioned that it's not just in the home, but the community. We start talking about bullying in schools. All right. So it's those experiences that are traumatic, and traumatic experiences, especially in early childhood, can start rewiring the brain. And that's where your neuropsychologists and they will come in to talk about that because it does affect brain development. Um, and then as you go through childhood and they are not dealt with, that's where it compounds and complicates and adds to the crippling of an individual's capacity to make healthy decisions, especially without external intervention. It becomes very complex. All right. And Adrian started talking about that a while ago in terms of we get in and that intervention is what helps them to be able to see alternative ways and therefore helps to teach them to make decisions. So yeah, that's me running away with it a little bit, and Adrian could jump in there.
Thanks, Natalie. Excellent. And we're also looking at community interventions, as you mentioned, and some communities are violent. Some communities actually are the object of discrimination, poverty, their lack of opportunities in certain geographical areas as opposed to others. So a lot of these social and racial inequities tend to also form that um, part of the adverse community experiences that a child may be exposed to. But then you also have things like adverse climate experiences. So that one of the more traumatic things that a child in, let's say, the hurricane belt can ever experience is to have the roof of your house blown off by a hurricane. People who were exposed to the shaking and baking in 2018 August, that 6.9 earthquake, as adults were traumatized, far less our children. So the climate experiences, the community experiences, the childhood experiences in the home all go towards the buildup of toxic stress in our children. So the study we mentioned is from 1998, and it was actually a study that was done on the basis of non-communicable diseases, particularly obesity. They were trying to find out why, and this was a study commissioned by an insurance company, because they know everything and more about us, right? So here have your actuarial scientists who want to figure out the best way to deal with things so that they don't have to be paying out money all of the time. And yet still, despite persons sharing their family medical history and so forth, whereby the insurance companies may have thought that they were at low risk of certain diseases, they were finding that a lot of people were making claims because they were developing some of these diseases. And these are like non-communicable diseases. So they needed to find out why. And the study was commissioned, and certain questions were asked of people to identify what types of experiences they had encountered in life before they turned 18. And those were the areas that Natalie mentioned in terms of physical, sexual, or verbal abuse, but not only abuse, but also neglect. And that goes back into the whole issue of attachment. Was I emotionally or physically neglected? The separation in the home by, if they weren't married, one person leaving. If they were married, a separation or a divorce or a death. Individuals in the home who may have had substance abuse challenges or even incarcerated. All of these are certain types of experiences that they've identified in that 1998 study, and it's been replicated around the world since then. And in some areas, they've added on other questions to identify the poverty in the community, which takes us into the adverse community type of experiences, war taking place in that region, climate experiences. And essentially, if you've had 4 or more categories of those experiences, you are at much greater risk of physical illnesses. You're at much greater risk of becoming a victim of violence. You're at much greater risk of becoming a perpetrator of violence. And it's because we are inherently resilient. God has made us that way. Even as children, we're resilient. But when things come at you again and again and again in waves, and you're not able to have that time to recover, and as Natalie mentioned, there are no external interventions to assist you to become resilient, then there's a breaking point for all of us. And that can put someone in a situation where they are operating at a deficit in terms of the development of their brain, in terms of the understanding of how to form healthy relationships, even in terms of communication. So if I'm being beaten as a young boy for crying and ridiculed for being emotional or showing my emotions, guess what? When I'm in a relationship as an adult, I'm not going to be talking to that lady. I'm not, because I have been socialized, I have been trained that it is unmanly to be conversational. It is unmanly to do certain things. And that's what I'm saying. Everything is connected. Everything is connected. So I think maybe our time is past now. I see it's after 3, but I believe that we've done sufficient justice to the question of where do we begin? And we must begin with an accurate diagnosis of what we're dealing with so that in future we can formulate the treatment plans and share with your audiences, Kimline.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Alexander, as well as Natalie O'Brady McDowell, for your insightful contributions this afternoon. It has really been quite impactful. I'm sure that indeed it would have stirred in the hearts of our listeners. What what can they indeed contribute towards seeing a safer place for our boys and girls. As you rightfully indicated, this is a series of discussion that will eventually lead to a treatment plan. So it requires a well coordinated effort by all interest groups, stakeholders, persons of interest who will really be able to put our minds together as to how this can be a true reality. But as we close, I want to ask both of you this simple question, because at each episode, what the goal of these sessions hosted by Repair of Hearts Foundation is to really instill hope, because many are feeling a sense of hopelessness. They are fearful, they are paranoid, and they just want to give up. The systems, they are stating that the systems have failed them. When I speak to, because our foundation work with at-risk, vulnerable, and displaced women, children, and teenagers, and many times our women, they say, we no one really cares. The system fails because within the same home they are seeing no parental support. Many times the different ministries that will also give them that sort of support is saying is ineffective. I mean, we will delve much more into those whole scenarios as the series is extended throughout the various months. But I want our viewers to go leaving this episode and any other episode with some level of hope. So my question to both of you: is there really hope of seeing a safer place for our boys and girls in Trinidad and Tobago? Either one of you can go first.
Um, I say yes, and I say so convinced because in the years that I've been working in this area, I have seen um, changes in one family at a time. I have seen, I have countless stories of people, families taking control and parents being able to help to navigate their children through adverse life experiences and come out positively. And I've seen some of those families start to give back to society. So I will say yes, there's hope because there are little things that we can do if we just um, the proverbial eat the elephant one bite at a time. It may seem like it's forever, but you would be surprised that the small wins, the satisfaction, let's look for the small wins that we have control over, and then it would lead to bigger wins where we could tackle things like legislation and all those other things, sustainability and funding that Adrian keep hitting us with, we could tackle those big things. But for now, the small wins for me. And so, yes, my bottom line is there's hope. I have seen it, I've seen change, and therefore I will continue to fight for continued change.
Thank you so much, Natalie. So yes, there's hope for Natalie. Yes, and for all of us. And Adrian, what about you?
I would simply say that I concur.
Mm,
It's why I do what I do and why I've been doing this for the past few decades, because I know that this is not a lost cause. I know and I have seen with my own eyes how many individuals have walked, fallen, got really muddy and messy, were able to get help to stand up again, get clean again, get whole again, get strong again, and continue walking. And they would have fallen afterwards, and still someone was willing to be there. And I think that is where my hope comes in. I have hope that persons listening to us would want to become individuals who would stand with and walk with people so that they can become all that God has created them to be. We cannot expect that individuals who have faced these challenges that we've talked about will attain that level of success on their own. It doesn't happen that way, and it will not happen that way. As long as we continue to develop a sense of selflessness in people, so that it's not about them and what's convenient for them, but it's about how can I serve this individual. Um, just quickly, over the past month or so, we've been doing some programs on air with Pastor Morris Johnson, and it's something that God showed from the parable of the Good Samaritan. And very often we hear the question, who is my neighbor? Because that was a question that was asked by the scribe who was trying to trick Jesus. And we unfortunately echo that question ourselves. But that's really not the question we're supposed to ask, because for those who have a Bible nearby, Luke chapter 10, from verses 25 to 37, the parable of the Good Samaritan. At the end of sharing this parable, Jesus asked the question that we ought to be asking. And the question he asked is, who was a neighbor to the person who was in need? So my question to you who are listening, whether you're a clinician, whether you're a parent, whether you're working in an NGO, whoever you are, the question that you have to ask yourself is, am I willing to be a neighbor to someone who is in need? Because if you're not, then please don't be an obstacle. Get to that point. Take time out to pray, to fast. Let God show you the dire need that is all around you and break your heart by seeing that need. Because what this world is crying out for is a love that transcends our human ability. This world is crying out for a love that will be selfless and sacrificial to meet their needs, because their need is great. And once we are willing to be that, then most certainly there is hope.
Definitely. And I think we should hashtag that. Most certainly there is hope. And we can even hashtag I will be that neighbor. All right. So we want to be a part of the solution and not the problem. For quite often, we always complain, and we always, point fingers as to who ought to do what they need to do, and they're not doing it too well, in our Trini Palangs. But we really want to be a part of, the solution, where as we begin to discuss this discussion to this afternoon, and we said, where do we begin in creating a safe place, or a safer place for our boys and girls in Trinidad and Tobago? We make mention that it has to take place within the home, but even more so, coming out of our discussions, we are saying, going even deeper than the home, it has to begin with us as an individual. It's an individual basis, which will then expand to a community level, even on a national level, and as it expands. So this afternoon, I trust that you will enrich, you will edify, you will encourage, but with hope that indeed we can see a safer, a brighter future for our boys, our girls, our young people, our men and our women. So thank you again for tuning in to Repair of Hearts Foundation. We are here to serve you, and indeed, one touch will make a difference. Good afternoon.